We're here, peak fantasy draft season. NFL preseason is finally in full swing, and that means we have entered the 3-weekend spans where the most fantasy drafts take place. And here at the Stokastic Fantasy Football channel, we've already got you covered on a variety of topics. Must draft players in every single round, breakout rookies, players we're avoiding at ADP, mistakes your less sophisticated league mates are likely to make, and now we're digging into the strategy that goes behind drafting a league-winning team. And that's what I'm here to do today. My name is Matt Savoca from the Stokastic Fantasy Football channel, and I'm here to talk about the 10 tips and tricks I've uncovered to help you win your fantasy league on draft night. And whether you're new to fantasy football this year or a seasoned vet who plays in plenty of leagues, I think you'll discover a lot that can help you within this video. And stick around to the end as well, because I've got a great offer from our friends over at Underdog Fantasy, and we'll kick in a free gift from Stokastic as well. Let's get into it. Tip number 1. Understand your league settings. Guys, this is absolutely the most important thing. Half PPR versus full PPR versus standard leagues. If there's any idiosyncrasies you need to know about within the scoring settings, the lineup settings are so important, especially if they start an extra quarterback, maybe an extra tight end. How many flex positions? How many bench positions? Does your league include an injured reserve spot? Can you include suspended players on that injured reserve spot? Guys, you need to know the answer to all of these questions before you go into your draft room. I guarantee you, there is one player in your league who doesn't know all these rules, and just simply knowing the rules better than him will make you a better drafter than him on draft night. Yes, he may luck into a player or two, but you can beat him over the long haul. Being better at knowing your league's rules compared to your teammates is a plus EV move that can help you win money year after year after year. The newer a league is, more likely it is it's being played inefficiently. But even for leagues that have drafted together for years upon years, you can often find idiosyncrasies that the league does that they actually shouldn't. And if there's a rule change, that's when you can really take advantage, especially with leagues that have a league history and a draft history that others are studying. Sometimes people lean on that too much and forget that the settings have changed from year to year. Number 2, read the room. Guys, sometimes the room is extremely into running backs, and regardless of what average draft position says, everyone wants their RB1 in their team. Have the courage and faith to go off the rankings and projections like the ones from Stokastic.com and take the player available at that spot. You might be dealing with a league that has a lot of homerism or bias towards a certain team, and you should be chomping at the bit when that's the case. Anytime we can take advantage of our league mates' biases, that's usually another plus EV decision for us and a way that we can win more money over time. You can also go back to your league's drafting history at this point. Are there certain players in your league who always draft certain teams or certain superstar players? Is there that guy in your league who's drafted Tom Brady in the first round every year for the last decade? Know these things before going into your draft room. Have the courage to be a little bit more flexible than your league mates. If you're zigging while others are zagging, it usually works out for you in the end. Tip number 3. Get a feel for this year's draft board. As your fantasy draft starts to play out, especially after the first 2 or 3 rounds, people are going to start making decisions based on the players they've picked previously. You should have an idea of what they're going to do, especially in the mid-rounds. There are certain points of this year's drafts that are more voluminous at certain positions. Specifically, the mid-rounds are chock full of wide receivers who could easily be the number 1 target on their team, but also the number 1 player in fantasy if absolutely everything breaks right. Trust your rankings and your process, even if the drafters around you are making decisions that seem wildly irrational. And don't get swayed by how this year's board is changing to how you expected it to play out. Every single draft is different, and if you're too rigid, you're bound to make mistakes. I see people especially making this mistake at the running back position. There are actually a lot of players this year in the double-digit rounds who could actually have starter potential. And I'm not saying forego the position in the beginning. I'm just saying you have options, and when you feel out the draft board, you understand which options are most advantageous to take. Tip number 4. Use consensus ADPs to discover idiosyncrasies within your specific draft platform. It's just the nature of the beast. Your commissioner has to decide which platform to draft your fantasy team on. And depending on which one they choose, you could see some huge discrepancies on where certain players are going. Take the Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receiver Chris Godwin. In half PPR fantasy drafts on Sleeper.com, he's going 60th overall right now. But if you were drafting on Yahoo.com, you would see his suggested ADP at 90th overall, a 30-pick differential. When you look across the industry, his consensus ADP is still at around 66th overall, well ahead of of what it would be on Yahoo, but it's actually slightly behind the suggested draft pick on Sleeper. So Godwin's value is actually slightly different depending on the platform you're playing on. Even a player like Alvin Kamara, where the news is that he won't get suspended in 2022 regardless of his legal situation. We're seeing his ADP as low as 22 in some places, but creeping up inside the top 15 in others. In my opinion, with no suspension on the horizon, it looks like he's a surefire first-round pick. But that's besides the point. Kamara is a different caliber of value depending on which platform you're drafting on. It only takes a few platform-specific value hits in order to get a huge leg up on your opponents. Tip number 5, get your guys early. And you see a little asterisk there because it's within reason, guys. I'm not saying suddenly because Dameon Pierce had one breakout performance in the preseason, he's now a first-round pick in fantasy drafts. But I am saying it's a lot more fun to play fantasy football with players you actually want to root for. If you've got a favorite player and he's going 15th overall in most drafts, and you want to take him at the 112, by all means, go ahead. While my suggestion is to stick very close to ADP in the first 3 rounds, especially when you hit rounds 4 and 5, you can move up a round or 2. It's not going to crush your chances. Now, don't get me wrong. If you do this over and over and over again, you're basically destroying the value of your team. But don't be afraid to deviate a little bit on draft night, especially if it's that one league, that one team that you can't help but check all the time. Make sure you like the players on that roster by the end of the draft. I think this is the most overlooked tip. Get your players early and have fun this fantasy season. Tip number 6, don't worry about the runs. At the onesie positions in particular, I'm talking about quarterbacks in a typical league and tight ends. They tend to all go in bunches in similar points of fantasy drafts. You'll see one league mate take a player from that position, and it's almost like the seal has been broken. Suddenly, everyone is interested in that particular position as well. You see this with quarterbacks just before the double-digit rounds all the time in typical leagues. And it's not uncommon with the tight end position as well. But I'm here to tell you, just ignore it. Focus on value and the needs of your own team. And if that means you need to join the run in the middle, by all means, go for it. Sometimes taking the player at the end of the run can be very advantageous. Your league mates did all the guesswork for you, and you just have one player at the end of your tier available to you. If you've already done the work of creating rankings and tiers like we have on Stokastic.com, then you've already done the hard work. It doesn't matter which one you pick ultimately. Yes, their scores may be different at the end of the season, but we can't know that going into the draft. You made the best decision you could with the information available at the time, which is the thesis behind me not paying any attention whatsoever to the runs of positions within fantasy drafts. Tip number 7, switch from a value approach to an upside approach after the starter rounds. When we're drafting players that we expect to start on a weekly basis, we need a guaranteed floor. Yes, ceiling is important, but we need to make sure that those players won't completely bomb our team on a weekly basis. Fantasy football, at least most leagues, is still a head-to-head sport, and so getting value separation at each starter round couldn't be more important. But then after starter rounds, we need to do a quick reversal. We need to make sure that we're incorporating upside into our decision making. What are the chances this player can be the number 1 option on their team? What are the chances this player can be a true fantasy difference maker? Those are the types of questions we need to be asking ourselves when we go into the double-digit rounds after the starters have been taken. If you've watched any of my previous videos on the Fantasy Football channel, you've probably heard me talking about my preference for drafting players who are meant to be repeating their expectations from last year instead of exceeding their expectations. But that's only true for the starters. At the bench rounds, I'm looking for the most upside possible. Remember, a lot of these players are going to end up on waiver wires anyway. This sometimes makes me more willing to draft a pure handcuff player than my league mates. But there isn't any one set rule or strategy here when it comes to finding upside. Look for beat writer reports, previous efficiency metrics, or breakout conditions. And if you draft right in the double-digit rounds, you might just have this year's must-have league winner. By the way, if you want to check out the must-have league winning options from the Stokastic Fantasy Football channel, go ahead and look at the video below. Tip number 8, take a swing or two on the next big thing. Going hand in hand with tip number 7, when we are looking for upside, we want the next big offense in fantasy football. We totally underestimated the offensive prowess of the 2021 Rams, for example. Or how about the 2018 Chiefs? Patrick Mahomes' first year as a starter. These are the types of offenses where if we take a few bets on them and we're correct, we are going to be soaring past our league mates during the fantasy playoffs. Now here's the caveat with this rule. You need to know when you're doing it. Know when you're taking these swings. It's probably going to be rookies or young young players who have breakout potential, or taking chances on offenses that have a chance to move from league average towards NFL elite. This year, because of their new wide receiver positions, teams like the Raiders, Eagles, or Dolphins are hot picks to be that team. But they're not the only teams that could be breakout offenses for fantasy football. The Denver Broncos added Russell Wilson at quarterback and have a plethora of receiving options on the outside. The Detroit Lions continue to add high caliber players throughout their skill positions. And the Baltimore Ravens have a ton of firepower returning from injury, even if they have a new number 1 receiver. If you draft 1 or 2 players from this year's breakout offense, you are going to be in great shape. Have some conviction and draft him right towards the end of those starter rounds. Hey guys, I just want to tell you about an awesome offer we have from our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. Right now, they've got the Best Ball Mania 3 tournament, which has the biggest prize pool in best ball history, a $10 million prize pool, including 3 opportunities to win $1 million or more. There's going to be someone who wins the regular season crown in that tournament who's sitting on $1 million during the playoffs with another chance to win $2 million. They've also had puppy drafts all off season long, a $5 entry point with up to $100,000 in prizes, and we got a deal for you guys right now. Use promo code Stokastic and you'll get up to a $100 first match deposit bonus. Simple as that. And if you do that, we will kick in another gift over at Stokastic.com. We will offer the Best Ball Draft Kit, which includes rankings for tournaments, for cash games, for all different platforms, and has our fantasy football rankings in there as well. Absolutely free. A $70 value if you use promo code Stokastic. That's STOKASTIC over at Underdog Fantasy. I urge you, in your season-long fantasy league, if you've never stacked your quarterback with at least 1 receiver or tight end, try to do it this year. Now, I'm not saying force it by any means, but even common sense high ceiling stacks like Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes are pretty viable from an average draft point position this year. DFS principles tell us that having that positive correlation, those same 2 players who do well on your team at the same time, can help you in head-to-head fantasy as much as it helps us in contests on DraftKings or FanDuel each week. Stacking is not just for your best ball drafts this summer. And again, I'm not saying go overboard here. If you're going to have 2 or even 3 players from the same team, make sure they're offenses that are expected to be elite from a fantasy perspective. But the natural volatility of fantasy scoring from week to week means that we actually should be leaning a little bit heavier into positive correlations like quarterback tight end or quarterback wide receiver stacks, even in season-long fantasy football. I think this is an edge that even veteran leagues and veteran players can take advantage of more often. And finally, number 10, keep it simple on draft night. Do not have a Ben McAdoo diner menu sized paper that has every single metric and every single projection you've ever run from every simulation all summer long. Don't overly rely on software or apps and their recommendations, unless of course it's from Stokastic.com. Tools, cheat sheets, algorithms, and rankings can get us very far, but I guarantee you understand the nuances of your draft room much better than any of those tools. My recommendation, besides a ranking for each player, just have 1 metric that helps you understand that player at a glance. And guys, this may come as a shock, but I don't care at all about bye weeks. The way my fantasy roster looks in the middle of the season is going to look nothing like it does at the beginning of the season. So on draft night, I just have my rankings from Stokastic.com, and I remember these tips. It also lets me have a lot more fun. While my friends are buried in their programs and spreadsheets, I'm enjoying myself. I know what my next move is, and because I'm following the tips, I'm probably drafting a better team than they are. I've seen extremely talented fantasy football players lose their league on draft night because they're too focused on their tools and not focused on the task at hand. Keep it simple, remember these tips, and you'll be in great shape. And that's it, guys. 10 tips to help you guys win your fantasy leagues. Make sure to like this channel and subscribe, and leave a comment below whether you thought this was stupid or helpful. It always helps us out in creating content for you guys. If you want to watch more videos like the must draft players in every single round, or our picks to be breakout candidates in 2022, just check the links below. I'm Matt Savoca from Stokastic Fantasy Football. We'll see you guys next time.